Code Veronica is a relatively unique entry in the Resident Evil series. It stands out as having the strongest focus on story, demonstrated by the most amount of time dedicated to cutscenes out of all the classic games. It's an ambitious game that really tried to push the boundaries of the series narratively. But pushing boundaries is not a risk-free endeavor, and complications arose in the developer's narrative-focused pursuit. The most evident complication manifested itself as supporting character Steve Burnside. Steve has encountered a fairly mixed reception among the community, and can really be treated as sort of a whiny punching bag by some. Even I've made fun of him in one of my videos. So the question that probably doesn't need to be asked is Steve really a bad character? Is the resentment people feel for him justified? It stumped me for a while, so I took the time to approach young Mr. Burnside in an unnecessary and overly analytical way to really discover whether or not his character is poorly written or not. When you look at Steve, he's cocky and sort of irritating, but also fragile and liable to making mistakes. He can come off as irritating, but I think the way that he is written does in fact capture the essence of someone his age. Steve is just an average 17-year-old, and in a sense it would be more unrealistic if he was another impervious tough guy that the series regularly features. Part of the reason he's a bit irritating is due to developing trust issues with others, as a result of his negative experiences with his family. These family issues are aptly demonstrated to the player in the scene where he has to kill his own father, a situation that most of us would hope never to be in. I think 17 is about right for how old the audience playing Code Veronica might have been, and I think it's not irregular for young men to have issues with father-type figures at that age. No Resident Evil character up to this point is especially relatable, and there certainly haven't been characters that have had a chance to grow over the course of the game narrative. If you look at Resident Evil 2, they add in narrative elements that can be related to in a basic, non-personal way. You can relate to the attraction towards a femme fatale, and you can relate to wanting to protect a child from danger, but you're not exactly relating to the character of Leon or Claire specifically. So when you think about it, Steve really has all the makings of a good protagonist. But the thing is, he isn't the protagonist of Code Veronica. When you look at the game's actual protagonist, Claire, she's strong and confident throughout the entire game. This is really keeping in theme with every other Resident Evil protagonist. They've always been unshakably tough with military or police backgrounds. Claire is an exception to this, but she's been through an entire game's worth of experience at this point, so there's a level of expectation that her character reflects that experience. This extra tough protagonist ideal in Resident Evil and many other video games is a demonstration of the concept of the power fantasy. Many video games set themselves out to be an experience where you can enact the fantasy of being a powerful figure that you can't be in the real world. Plus, Resident Evil has always had elements of American action movies in its blood, so these tough guy main characters are really part of the DNA of Resident Evil. So when you see someone like Steve, he doesn't fit into the expectations that has been set by previous Resident Evil games, and arguably video games as a whole. The fact that Claire is a tough character with not a lot of depth is not a negative necessarily. It's that this type of character isn't challenged. And when I say challenge, I don't mean tougher enemies. I mean circumstances that challenge her as a person. Claire has clear experience and strength over Steve in both a physical and mental sense, and Alfred is plainly evil, so that's not going to challenge her morally either. This is why Steve is essentially an inappropriately used character. Claire Redfield is clearly our protagonist of this story, and Steve in no way changes her as a character. The only thing that both an audience and Claire can identify with is that Steve is sort of annoying. This is what I think is the most pervasive reason for why Steve is reduced down to being an irritating character, since this really is the sole identifying attribute that an audience has to share with its protagonist here. From my perspective, Rodrigo is the clear choice for the character that should have been at the forefront of the story, as opposed to Steve. Claire being forced to work with this rather stoic Umbrella employee, someone who works for this nasty company and put her through her worst nightmare, and Rodrigo not respecting someone he views as a sort of rebellious criminal or even a terrorist. but in order to survive, they have to work together. As the story goes along, we get a little more of Rodrigo's perspective, and we get more of a sense that Umbrella isn't simply a company full of evil people. And maybe after Rodrigo and Claire hash their differences, he agrees to testify against Umbrella once they escape, which gives a stronger motivation for their survival and stronger motivation for why Alfred or any other kind of Umbrella villain would want to eliminate them. That would be a much better story and character concept in my opinion. Notice this idea didn't involve changing Claire or Alfred's character. Even if they are somewhat basic heroes and villains respectively, inserting a character who is more likely to challenge them extracts a lot more depth or motivation from them. This is why Steve fundamentally doesn't work. Not because he's a bad character, but the fact that he's a character that doesn't serve towards developing anyone else other than himself. The motivation behind the creation of Steve is admirable, and I believe they captured the essence of someone his age, but these good intentions are for naught, since he simply doesn't fit into this game.